Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar news update video. In this video I have two pieces of information to cover, one smaller one which is the cover reveal for the Avatar The Last Airbender, the Search Omnibus Edition, and then the bigger piece of news which I'll cover after that is going to be that we have more pages, preview pages for Avatar The Last Airbender, the Shadow of Kyoshi. So the second Kyoshi novel, we finally have a lot more preview pages, so I'll be going through them in a bit of depth. So let's start off with this one, cover for the Search Omnibus Edition. So first things first, I suppose this book is coming out 27th of October 2020. There's a brief look at the cover there, but this article on Comics Beat is what is revealing it to us. So there it is. As you can see, it's the same theme or style as the Promise Omnibus Edition cover, with the white background and mainly just focusing on the characters who are sort of in this story. So yeah, you can see the Promise Omnibus cover there, again white background, 5 characters, and here we have white background, 5 characters. The other interesting thing between them is that the character in the front, or in this case characters Momo and Aang, are highlighted. They have a big black outline around them and they're more in like full color, whereas Katara, Sokka, Zuko and Toph are all sort of a little bit faded into the background, and the same is the case here. Zuko's in full color, he has a big black outline around him, highlighting him much more than the other characters, and then you have Azula and Katara and Sokka all sort of more faded into the background. So I like that kind of consistency of like, okay, this is what all of the covers for the omnibus editions are going to look like. It's going to be a selection of characters with one as the focus, more than likely. So how is this? How is this as a collected cover for the Search? In general, I like it. I love Team Gurihuru's art, and these images of all the characters are great. The big firebending kick shows great action from Zuko. I like Sokka's big wide pose with his club there. They always do Katara's waterbending poses very nicely, which is again in place here. I like that Aang's on the glider. That's something very different in this cover. And then Azula being there with the lightning adds something very different, and that she's the sort of like unique thing about this cover, because of course, you know, Toph isn't in this one, but Azula is, so it makes sense why she's there. But I think the question is like, why didn't they put anything Ursa related into the cover? Now, I think the explanation is obviously that they've gone for this specific style of cover where they're focusing on the main characters and they're not particularly trying to portray the plot in the cover. In that the Promise Omnibus doesn't really feature any of like the background of like Yu Dao or anything like that. It doesn't feature like King Kwei or what the actual plot of the book is about. So in the same way, we don't really see the locations that they're in here, the spiritual elements of the plot, nor do we see the backstory plot of the book with Ursa and so on. I still think that from almost like a marketing point of view, why isn't Ursa in there somewhere? Because that would sell more books in my mind. Yes, I think a lot of fans at this point are aware The Search is the comic that is about Zuko's mom. I think a lot of people know that at this point, but the people that don't and just see this as like an Avatar comic, they're like, okay, cool, like Azula's in there, but like, does it necessarily just spring off the page that The Search means the search for Zuko's mom if they are not familiar with the comics at all? And I think you have to do that like in comparison to The Search Part 1, which is an excellent cover, and it's why I think this book stands out and why this book always goes out of stock everywhere, is because just from the cover you can tell The Search is about searching for Zuko's mom. And it's like, okay, Zuko being assisted by Team Avatar, that's why Aang's on the cover as well, plus Azula for some reason are searching for Ursa. That's really, really good. The way that like Ursa is sort of faded in the sky, she is the goal that they're heading towards, that gets it across really, really nicely. And it's something I don't think even the library edition didn't even get across as much as it should have. I have the same kind of, I think, issues maybe with the Search Omnibus cover as I do with the library edition, of just, it's 5 characters, they have more of the background representing the spiritual plot here a little bit more, and it's a really nice image, but where is Ursa? I know on the Search library edition Ursa is focused on the back, but I think it would have had impact to also have it on the front here as well. And the same goes here. I think you maybe could have like switched things around here and also had a similar type of effect of a sort of more faded in the background Ursa in the background, because it's not really like a spoiler in this book that it's very heavy about Ursa, in that like the first page of the Search Part 1 gets across the idea. This is Ursa, this is her backstory, this is what this book is going to be about. It's not going to be 3 books where we take our time and then right at the very end we reveal Ursa. No, she's in it, she's the focus from the very beginning, and it feels weird not to have her here like at all. But like I said, I get visually what they're trying to do here with this, and they do stand out as being really nice group shots of Team Avatar. So I suppose it prompts the speculation of what are they going to do for the others. So the Rift, my impression is that Toph is going to be the focused character in the front, with like Aang and the others in the background. That seems very fitting. The Rift is very much like the Toph focus book, so she very much would fit for that. Smoke and Shadow is probably the most interesting one in terms of like, immediately you'd go towards Zuko again, but they already did that for the Search. But would they do it again? Is it going to be Aang again? Because beyond those two, like, what else stands out? Like, unless you're going to have May on the front of the cover, which I don't know if they would necessarily want to do that. I think May is going to be on the cover for Smoke and Shadow. I don't know if they'll make her the focus character, though. So, will they make the Kimura Kage the focus? I don't think so. I think they want to make one of the main characters a focus. So, might we see our first repeat character with Zuko probably on Smoke and Shadow? Perhaps. I suppose it would be slightly different to have him in his Fire Lord outfit as being the focus character, but we'll see. North and South, 100%, it's probably going to be Katara as the focus character, with probably Sokka and Hakoda in the background. That, I think, makes a lot of sense. And then, in balance, obviously, the cover will probably be done by Peter Wortman, so it might be slightly different. I think they'll still do the thing where it's a white background and it's still a character piece. So, I guess... I suppose the only problem with the imbalance is that imbalance, like, theoretically could have like almost like the exact same cover as The Promise here, nearly. So we'll have to see how exactly that goes. But in general, I like the image because I love Team Guru's art, and I like the clean style with the white background. I just wish it presented a little bit more about like, this is the big comic, because I think it'd get more people to buy the book if it had Ursa on the front, just like I said with the idea that the Search Part 1 stands out so much because it's so clear just by looking at the cover what it's about. You don't need to read the blurb or anything like that. You know just from the cover what this book is about, and this is the answer to that big question from the finale. So I really do like that a lot. But yeah, with that out of the way, we'll move on to the next piece of news, which is our focus here, which is going to be the preview pages, which are on Amazon.com for the Shadow of Kyoshi. So, as expected, we have a lot of pages here. There's about like 30 or something like that. And unfortunately, it does include some of the epilogue. So it jumps from about the first 30 or so pages of the book to like the last few pages of the book, as expected. I'm not going to show off the last few pages of the book, outside of the fact that, look, here it is if you want it, but I'm not actually going to go through it in detail or anything like that. The first thing I want to focus on here is this. This is the, of course, back page of the book, and we get, I suppose, the finalized description, because in many ways, like, we haven't actually had a full description about what the actual plot of this book is about. The first paragraph here is what we've seen before, that, you know, a mysterious thread emerges from the spirit world. That's obviously the sort of Yun plot with Father Glowworm and whatever's happening there. The second paragraph, apart from just like, okay, she's going to the Fire Nation, we sort of knew that. Most of this second paragraph is new. Kyoshi's travels take her to the Fire Nation, where she reunites with Rangi and becomes the Fire Lord's guest of honor for an important cultural holiday. But underneath the celebration lies a dangerous game of court politics, and when the palace itself is attacked, she, Rangi, and their allies must deliver justice before the Fire Nation is consumed by strife. So this is very cool. We're delving into Fire Nation politics quite heavily, and we're going to be dealing with some issues in the Fire Nation before, I suppose historically it becomes known as the evil nation with the changes Sozin makes. So we're going to see a very different Fire Nation here, and we're going to see what sort of politics they were dealing with before the Fire Lord was like Sozin, like Azulon, like Ozai. So that's going to be very, very cool to see. And I like that it just confirms to us, like, okay, at the time of the important holiday, that's when Kyoshi arrives, and a lot of stuff is happening, and Kyoshi and Rangi are going to get involved in this. You do sort of also wonder, like, their allies. So who are they referring to there? Are they new characters, or are we going to see the likes of Kirima and the other members of the Flying Opera Company again show up? But we have to wait and see. So, we go through the other sort of credits pages of the book here. As you can see, we get a bunch of pages. But yeah, we get a prologue. So there's a prologue here. Also, we get some of Chapter 1, and we find out that the preview that we got previously wasn't like all of Chapter 1, but it wasn't even the start of Chapter 1, as we'll get to. So it's pretty fun. So we'll go through the prologue here because it's an insight into Yoon, as you can see here. Boy. Yoon clawed at his own neck until he drew blood. The feeling of slime and teeth lingered on his skin. Boy, stop your sniveling. He remembered Jeonju lighting the incense. He remembered the sticky sweet smell and the deadness it created in his limbs. Sting jelly venom, his training told him. He'd only just started his doses with Sifu Amok. Yoon blinked and tried to make sense of his surroundings. His hands clawed into wet, porous moss when it should have been the dust of the mining town under his fingernails. He was in a mangrove forest. The sky was the color of acid. He crawled around, the juices of a swamp sucking at his knees. The trunks of the leafless trees twisted and gnarled as high as the hills, barely lighter in color than silhouettes. Screened by the loose weave of branches, a great glowing eye stared at him. It was the eye that had spoken, the eye that had told him he wasn't the Avatar, of course. A pain, terrible and familiar, racked his stomach and folded him in two. His forearm splashed into the swamp water. The landscape around him began to shake, not from earthbending, but from something rawer and more uncontrollable. He wasn't. End of sentence. He was nothing. The shallow water danced, raindrops on a drum, spiking into geysers. The shoreline swayed, rattling the trees, bucking and clashing them together like antlers of beasts locked in combat. Yoon dashed his head against the ground in a frenzied corruption of a student bowing to their master, Jeonju. His entire mind was a screamed name, a single screeching tone on a broken flute. His skull thudded against the brackish mud. Jeonju. Stop it, you miserable little brat, the eye roared. Despite its anger, it shrank back from him, afraid of his throes of agony. The ground squeezed and fluttered, the heartbeat of a man falling to his death, pounding louder and louder before the final impact. Yoon wanted it to stop. He wanted the anguish to end. It hurt so much to see everything he'd worked for shredded to sparks and dust. It was destroying him from the inside, so let it out. The whisper came to him from his own voice, not the eyes, not Jeonju's, but the pain outside. Put it somewhere else, on someone else. The rip started at his feet, a pinprick in overstretched silk. The tear birthed itself in the water and raced into the banks of the earth like lightning cracking the sky. The ground split apart, releasing all its quaking tension in one swift cataclysmic burst, and then stillness. Yoon could breathe again. He could see. The trembling had worn itself out, spent its energy in the creation of a long lesion in the ground and a natural wound upon the landscape. Swamp water poured into the injury, masking a depth he knew he shouldn't explore. Things were so much clearer when there was relief. Yoon used the moment of respite to look around. The musty grove resembled no forest he'd seen. The dim light in the sky came from no discernible sun. This place was a hazy reflection of a real landscape, painted with ink that had been thinned too much. I'm in the spirit world. So this is really, really cool of like, oh, okay, so this is what happened here. Father Glowworm dragged Yoon into the spirit world. So we've seen this before. This is kind of like what Heibai did in that early episode of just, you know, taking people into the spirit world, and that's what's happened to Yoon here. He backed away from the ravine that lay before him, not wanting to be dragged in by the force of the water's flow. Turning around, he pulled himself to drier footing using the exposed roots of a leathery tree. The air smelled like sulfur and rot. Master Kelsang had told him about the spirit world. It was supposed to be a beautiful wild place full of creatures beyond imagining. The realm of the spirits was a mirror held up to its visitors, a reflection of your emotions, a reality that shaped around your own spirit's intangible projection. Yun flexed his fingers, finding them as solid as they could be. He wondered if the gentle monk had ever explored a nightmarish bog like this one. They never talked about what happened if you entered the spirit world while you were still in your body. The rustle of branches gave him a start and reminded him he wasn't alone. The eye. It watched carefully from the darkness of the forest, circling him on translucent appendages studded to what he knew to be human teeth. He'd felt its bite back in the mountains when it had sampled his blood. A pulsing panic rushed through the chambers of his heart. Yun knew he was on borrowed time. He tried to remember what Jeonju had called the spirit. Father Glowworm? The ice suddenly rushed closer, socketing itself into the gap between two nearby trees. Yun shrieked and fell backwards on his elbows. He'd made a mistake. A crucial invisible barrier had been broken by saying the name aloud, and now he was more connected and vulnerable to it than ever. I call myself that, the spirit said. Father Glowworm's pupil darted around unnervingly, the iris squeezing narrower. Its gaze had the heft of a probing tongue. Now, child, I believe you owe me your name. Like a fool, Yun had fallen into the role of Bumpkin from the cautionary Earth Kingdom folktales, the poor field hand or woodcutter who fell under a curse or was simply eaten. He could only think of how he'd been consumed, rasped into a pulp maybe, and absorbed into the slime. My name is Yun. His palms were slick with fear. In some of those tales, the stupid boy survived through sheer pluck. Yun was already prey. His only chance was to become interesting prey. His poise was failing him, his slickness under pressure that had impressed the Fire Lord and the Earth King, the chieftains of the water tribes and the head abbots of the air temples alike. And then we don't get the remaining, how many pages is it? So 8, this is page 7, so then 6, so 5 and 6 would be the end of this chapter. So there's still 2 more pages of the prologue that I suppose are going to get across more of Yun's dynamic with Father Glowworm and how I don't know if in 2 pages they're going to be able to explain to us how Yun goes from being this character to being the one that we see at the end of the first book. So I assume that will be more of like as he gradually makes his appearances, you know, come out, we'll get more and more of this, because the Yun we see here very much is still the Yun from the start of the Rise of Kyoshi, where it's still him, it's still him upset about not being the Avatar, but it's not dark Yun yet. There's a hint of it earlier on here. Where is it? Yeah, so this idea of like letting out his pain, put it somewhere else, on someone else, of like his own pain about what's happened to him, he's going to like apply to other people. But the fear of just being in the spirit world and everything that's happened, he's not really able to talk. He's not his usual self. So how's he going to, I suppose, prove to Father Glowworm that he's going to be useful or whatever? It's an interesting one for sure. So I do like that setup, that the book starts with sort of a prologue about the thing we're most interested in. But here's chapter 1, and we see that, oh yeah, it starts with this instead of the bit that we saw. So again, I'm not going to read all of this because I'll be here all day, and I don't want to just destroy my voice, you know, reading the whole book. So what we get here in this first section is the idea of like, these are 2 of the guards basically guarding the person, of course, Kyoshi is after. So as she, of course, as we saw from the earlier preview, you know, drills her way into this building basically all the way down, these are some of the guards that she actually goes past to get to Mok. And of course we're in Lunkhouse city block and stuff like that. The description here also makes it a little bit clearer as to the way to sort of visualize the city block that she's in, of that like some of it's built overground but some of it's built underground, they kind of explain here. So it's definitely pretty cool here, and there's more kind of a context given to this of like, here's their plan. When they see something coming, of course, they're going to head down to the stairs. That's when they'll strike. And of course, later on, like Kyoshi actually says that, okay, so I'll avoid all the stairwells because that's where they'll be waiting for me. And she just goes like straight past them all and so on. So that's pretty cool. So they get into contact with Kyoshi here at this point and so on. And yeah, tell me where I can find your boss. And then this is where we get this section from the actual preview. This is where it started, right up until pretty much the end of the chapter, I think. Yeah, here. Kyoshi drew one of her fans. 2 would have been a bit too much. That's where the preview that we got before ended. And then we get that it does actually continue on after that here. So that's pretty cool. So, you know, are you going to murder me in cold blood like you did to Zhu? And obviously this is referring to Zhu Ping An, the lightning bender guy, of course. And there's some interesting stuff that goes on here of just this idea of how she views the fact that she did have to kill that guy, and how she's kind of feeling about that, of like people view her as being this person who is very willing to kill when she has to, and she sort of has to defend herself by just saying like anything goes in the light tie, which of course is kind of true. And yeah, there's a contact in Ba Sing Se that's kind of causing a lot of this stuff to happen. And he says it was someone from the middle ring of the city. And then when she gets outside here, she's been working with the sort of police force in Ba Sing Se. And what's his name? Yeah, Captain Lee, this guy, also reveals that he got a tip-off from a guy in the middle ring. And so they present this sort of idea that this city block, they purposefully sort of allowed the Dao Fate to come in, so that the police would have to interfere and get the Avatar involved, which would like clear them out and kind of free up this place to sort of be used. There's sort of like almost like a bit of a conspiracy kind of going on here. It's very, very interesting what's going on here. And it seems weird at the very start of the book that he seemingly like cut away from this thing in the Earth Kingdom, and then we're going to transition the story into being sort of more about the Fire Nation. So it's definitely pretty cool. Again, I'd have to read in a little bit more depth, and of course there are pages here and there that are kind of cut out. Like we don't get to see page 20 here, so there's a whole little bit missing in the middle of this. But yeah, she kind of threatens, you know, the captain to not do anything and so on. Yeah, shame for what she'd done. And yeah, it just gets this interesting idea across of like, I can't remember if it's exactly here or if it's later, but there's this talk of like her gradually realizing that she's sort of becoming almost more and more like Jianzhu, that the things that he would be willing to do and did do, she is now sort of ending up doing a lot of that stuff, of being sort of brutal to accomplish what she needs to do. And she just notes these things of like, you know, he gifted her basically everything in the end, and this is the thing that she constantly remembers from here on out, of like everywhere she goes it's something that Jianzhu gifted her. She's using his advice for the best way to break into this place and take everyone out. A lot of her clothes were given to her by him, so he still has like an impact on her as we go through this, which I do really, really like. And yeah, we get the idea that she has this place in the middle ring of the city that is one of Jianzhu's kind of you know, homes that he had, that he's given to her. And yeah, it would be quick, it would be efficient, it would be brutal. Jianzhu would have approved. Yeah, she'd slipped yet again into the mindset of her deceased benefactor. She'd heard his words in her own voice, the two of them speaking as much unity as the avatars were supposed to be able to with their past lives. Just very, very interesting things. And like, yeah, so I think we don't quite see this bit, but like a shudder of revulsion ran up Kyoshi's back when she thought of how she'd smothered Lee with the exact same technique Jianzhu had once used on her. That what it felt like to die slowly as your lungs caved in on themselves. So like, she's kind of killing people here is what we're getting across. That she kind of opened the door with killing Zhu that she's kind of willing to continue on with at this point. But then Monk Jinpa, who I think is at the end of the first book, kind of comes in. We get an interesting kind of conversation back and forth of like, he's kind of her like avatar handler in a way. He's giving her like advice about, you know, you should participate in high society to some extent, as he says here. You can't just ignore the leadership of the Earth Kingdom forever. And we get the idea that like Kyoshi still considers herself like Dao Fei, so she doesn't want to be in tight with the leadership of the nations. That's not who she is, and this really helps to inform a lot of her like stuff that happens later on in her life, of like why she basically has no respect for the Earth King, why she won't really like work for him or with him. She always will be like, okay, to get what I want, I will do something for you, but I really don't respect you at all. So I like that sort of setup that we have going on here. And yeah, he just says, at some point you will have to stand upon a greater stage. The Avatar creates ripples in the world, whether they mean to or not. And then this is an interesting one about, like, there's obviously the tease at the end of the book about, like, oh, is Jinpa involved in the Order of the White Lotus? What's this going on with is that a saying among your mysterious friends who you won't tell me about? The secret organization. You get that idea, because they get across that he's very young, and Kyoshi kind of feels weird that a guy who's like maybe like 4 or 5 years older than her, and they're still both very young, is sort of almost lecturing her in like the way to navigate the politics of the world. It's quite interesting. And she just notes here that like there's this other frustrating thing about Jinpa. He wouldn't trade jabs with her like Kirima or Wong. He showed her too much respect because she's the Avatar. So we find out that she is also looking for Yun. Any reports of him, that's what she's focused on right now. That she's doing this Dao Fei thing of like taking them out. There's talks earlier on, I think, about that she's getting injured gradually. Of course, she injured her neck in this one and so on. She has the burns from the previous book, that she's almost like, there's almost this impression of like, if she keeps going down this path of being this heavily involved in the action, she's going to end up with so many injuries just with what's going on. So yeah, so pretty interesting stuff. There's a few more mentions of like Liu Beifong here, of like, given what Jianzhu did, that there's this sense of like Liu Beifong is like distance himself completely from anything related to Jianzhu, and the idea that Yun is this fake avatar. It's pretty interesting. And even here there's a nice moment. Jinpa mentions the search for the false avatar. Don't call him that. She's not happy about that at all. We find out that we don't get page 34 or 35, and yeah, obviously it's during these 2 pages where he tells her about the invitation to go to the Fire Nation, because here is when it's talked about, this holiday festival, and like tell the Fire Lord that like I'm honored to accept his invitation. I'm guessing at some point a little bit earlier on, like when she finds out it's an invitation to go to the Fire Nation, she immediately remembers Rangi, and that's why she immediately jumps at the opportunity, because I think they talk about it a little bit later on. But yeah, it was a very specific piece of news at the end of the Fire Lord's message. The former headmistress of the Royal Academy had returned home after a long convalescence in Agna Kela, the capital of the Northern Water Tribe. So that's interesting. We find out the name of the capital of the Northern Water Tribe, Agna Kela. I don't know what exact way to pronounce that. Okay, so this is Heiran getting healed up in the Northern Water Tribe. So had Rangi also returned, so that's nice. Acquaintances, yeah. So yeah, Rangi, her thumping heart, so she really wants to see her again. She was not going to get much sleep tonight. And yeah, we find out that the next chapter is called Past Lives. And the main thing here, this one's maybe a bit cut up by some pages kind of being missing. But they're talking about stuff like Yang Chen gets brought up. She wished she understood Yang Chen's leadership like a real scholar, and so on. But she's on this bison, and there's an interesting point here. Jinpa's bison Yin Yang had only 5 feet instead of 6. As a calf, he'd been attacked by a predator and lost his left forelimb. As an adult, his injury caused him to list slightly to the side when he was flying, which required Jinpa to give a gentle tug with the reins in the opposite direction every so often to maintain a straight course. So that's pretty cool. Also, they mention here, Kelsang's bison Pung Pung was busy raising calves of her own in a well-deserved retirement. So that's kind of nice to hear. That's pretty cool. I like those just mentions of like, they don't forget that Pung Pung was with Kyoshi, but here's where Pung Pung is right now. So that's pretty cool. And then yeah, we sort of cut off a lot of the rest of it at this point. We get the idea of like she's on the bison and suddenly she's getting this like insight from the past lives. They're like screaming at her like Kyoshi, and she falls off the bison. Kyoshi, Kyoshi, and it's Avatar Korak again trying to speak to her. So I suppose at this point we maybe get a little bit more insight into what he's trying to say to her. But yeah, as you can see here, pages 42 to 335 are not included in this book preview. And then for some reason, they give us the epilogue. And I won't go into it too much here, but just quick look at the first paragraph. Taz? Is that the first, the warlord on one of the Fire Islands? Fire Lord Zoryu, Chancellor Kaoli, Chancellor Dyrens. There's some interesting names coming up here, but I suppose we find out the name of the Fire Lord here, Fire Lord Zoryu. And Taz is mentioned. That's very cool. It gives you an insight into like, oh, okay, Fire Nation politics, as in the politics between the Fire Islands, potentially. That's very, very cool to me. But I won't go any more into that. They don't show you the full epilogue, but they do stop just before like the last couple of pages, and there are some stuff that I think would be considered spoilers if you do go on, so just be aware of that. If you don't want to ruin parts of the book for yourself, don't read the rest of the epilogue. But yeah, pretty good stuff. Obviously it's still the very early section of the book before we're right into the main pieces of action, but I love what we get here. We get the tease of what's going on with Yun being in the spirit world at the start. We get, you know, of course, over the prologue, over the first chapter, the idea of like she's taking out the sort of bad Dao Fei in the world, and is experiencing more of the corruption in the Earth Kingdom. And to solve all of this, she's been forced to almost become the same type of person that Jeonju was, in terms of the brutality in a way that which she has to approach these things. And the idea that we're again sort of getting in depth into the idea of, you know, what killing Zhu sort of meant for her, and it seemingly has opened up this door to where it is something that she is kind of willing to do when she has to do at this point, which is definitely good development, because she now feels much more like the Kyoshi that we see from her sort of flashbacks that we saw from the show, of like always being the character that like, I'll do what I need to do for justice, even if that means killing someone. And so we're seeing how she's sort of formed into that person, despite being at the very start of the rise of Kyoshi, this character who is very unwilling to get involved in fights or anything like that. So some obviously strong development even at just the start of this. And again, the same level of like world building is in play here. We're referencing back to the previous book. We're exploring names of like the capital of the Water Tribe, Northern Water Tribe. That's really cool. Names of places in the lower rings of Ba Sing Se. Little details about like, oh look, here's a bison who was attacked and has an injury, and how they're affected by it. Just very, very solid world building constantly throughout this. So this has definitely got my anticipation quite high for this book. We're still, it's actually exactly 2 months away as of the recording of this video. We're 21st of May today. 21st of July is when this book actually comes out. So it's going to be a tough, like, I suppose 8 weeks until this one comes out. But we'll get there. We'll get there. But definitely I'm very, very excited for this. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on the Search Omnibus cover, as well as some of these preview pages from the Shadow of Kyoshi. But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.